So when two people get together in a relationship, 80% of the journey of that relationship is already set. So what I mean by that is that let me. So you have person like say you and a partner. Now you have all of your framework of assumptions, beliefs, expectations, all of these things that are wired into your neurology. So we, for everyone who wasn't here yesterday, what we talked about was that by the age of 70% of all your neural pathways are already set. So they're already connected. So what that means is, and we also talked about the triune brain theory. So we have a reptilian brain. A reptilian brain is about danger and hunger. The limbic brain is about emotions. It's about belonging, status, power, control, those kind of things, or the limbic brain. And then we've got the intellectual brain. So when we're here talking about things rationally, it's easy to talk from the intellectual brain. But in a relationship, you don't have the space and you don't have always the emotional balance to respond intellectually. So most of the time, because we're short of time, because we have other stresses going on, we respond emotionally. And so we respond to what's wired up in our neurology. So where we talked about what we understand before the age of 7 is kind of like a fairy tale framework, which you can see in where do people spend their money in relationships. They spend it on, like on average, people spend £32,000 on a wedding, spend like £3,000 to £5,000 on an engagement ring, and yet no one spends anything on preparing for the relationship. So when people feel their people feel like a pressure that they have to be beautiful enough, or they have to be like the man who's the provider or whatever enough to be loved. And yet relationships don't break down because of looks, almost never, or it breaks down based on how people feel in the relationship. So so the future problems that we have are based on the flawed assumptions and the beliefs and the frameworks that we have today. So when two people meet, that they might consciously talk about what they want in the future. They might consciously talk about these things, but there's a lot of unstated assumptions and expectations and fears and anxieties. And many of these will only become revealed through different challenging life events. So when people have children, there's suddenly a lot of extra stress that reveals some of those assumptions and beliefs. When people are like their jobs are in, like they're busy with their jobs, or they're threatened with redundancy or something like that, where there's a big threat, that's when you start seeing more of the assumptions. So the fairy tale is a fairly universal program that we have, but each of us have our own programs. We have our own defining moments that we've either observed of others, something's happened that's made a great impact on us, or there's some kind of lesson either someone we really respected when we were young told us, or in some way has driven us. So if you look at the most driven people, they're usually driven sometimes because they've been poor and they decided they never want to be poor, sometimes because they needed to prove something to their parents. They felt that's how they needed to be loved, or some other thing has driven them. So I remember years ago, I was on a course, like a therapy course, and I was talking to, I was working with this bloke who was, he was like super successful. He'd been CEO of lots of different big companies, um, and he'd achieved great success. And it was all because his dad once said to him, "Do your best." And he was now at an age of like maybe 60, and he was come to the end of his career. And he said, "Well, what does that mean? How do I ever know that I've done my best?" And so many people are driven by um, they're driven by something. So um, everyone's relationship journey follows whatever the things that are key to them. Right? Does this make sense, or is it have I gone too abstract?
No, it makes sense. The thing is, how do you then kind of reconcile what drives one person and then what drives the other? I mean, is there a meeting point, or is it conflict, or
So it's really about understanding, but it's so we talked about connection, on connection being more important than a relationship, and the way that you connect is by someone's sharing. So when there's a problem, every problem that you have is underpinned by all of this. So the big fights that people have are about money, sex, and children, but they're not really about money, sex, and children. So John Gottman talked about um, when people thought about money, he asked them, "What does money mean to you?" And he stopped at he stopped at 100 different definitions of what money meant. So to some people, money means freedom, money means love, money means control, money means obligation, money means security. So when people are fighting about money, they're not really fighting about money. Money is the symbol of what it means to them. So in the same way that I say connection is more important than the relationship, because what we're looking when we talk about a relationship, it's kind of lazy thinking because what do we really want? The relationship is symbol for connection, because all of us our core drive is to connect. It's how we make sense of the world. It's how we um, feel not alone. So if you look at football supporters, like they're so passionate about their team, and it's because their team represents, like they identify with their team. People like Justin Bieber, what they Beliebers, they'll follow him around because he represents something in their identity. Like I think the most successful band is it Iron Maiden or Grateful Dead or something like that, but they're not a big band. They're not like chart topping band, but they have the most passionate fans because they identify with them. Like I've seen lots of things about the Grateful Dead, about what they mean to people, and so it creates like this tribe and this sense of identity, and that's why Cristiano Ronaldo and like Lionel Messi get like 30 million a year, because they mean something to people. There's some sense of identity. What happens in most relationships? So I talked about the relationship curve goes down like this, and it goes um, so a relationship curve goes the normal relationship. If you just do nothing and just follow the normal program, it goes downwards like that, and it goes downwards um, because like we're running on these programs, and so we get resentful, we get angry, and so we get disconnected. And what breaks the relationship is usually someone says we're incompatible, we grew apart, um, or someone cheats, or there's a betrayal, or they just end up not being able to live together without arguing. And it's not actually those things that broke the relationship. they're just the symptoms of when they've lived. So we said there's a line, somewhere along there, there's a line where the relationship enriches and where the relationship drains. And what happened was that they got drained from the relationship for so long that eventually one of the other triggering things, which is the thing that triggered the end of the relationship. So when you have conflict is either an opportunity to connect, because behind the conflict is, what does this really mean? What am I threatened by? What am I fighting for? And so there's two people really that really say question. So we talked yesterday about Sue Johnson says that two people are like two children in a relationship, asking, can I trust you? Do you love me? Will you be there for me? And so often when we're arguing, when we're fighting, it's really about that. It's really about looking for reassurance. And Howard Markman talks about there's basically three key arguments that couples have. It's for care and concern, respect and recognition, and power and control. So people are really fighting about whatever their kind of life theme is will determine what they're fighting for. And so when you go deeper into it, and like, so what will normally happen is we'll just argue, and we'll argue about the toothpaste, we'll argue about the place not being tidy, we'll argue about the toilet seat being up, but we're not really arguing about that. And if all that we do is argue that's the curve that we'll have. But if we talk about, like, what does that really mean? What are we really fighting for? What does that mean to you? Then that's an opportunity to connect. And then when you connect, you go deeper. And it's through, like, the way that you find problems and the flawed assumptions is by seeing them happen in real life. And then the awareness of understanding what drives it, and then being able to share that. And what really creates connection is when we share human to human. So does that make more sense? Nancy?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And so we talked about the scale. Really, the scale is that I said we're living in an age of confusion. And so when people get confused a lot, and there doesn't seem to be an answer, they become frustrated. And when they get frustrated a lot, then they begin to despair. And when people despair for long enough, they start to get bitter. And that's where they decide that women are the problem. So what we're talking about this week has really been about clarity. Like, what are the steps? But clarity is more intellectual. It can help you see where you're going, but it's really about capacity, which is the point at which you're capable of doing all those emotional things. And capacity is about overcoming your neurology and the things that are in your operating system that are holding you back from having the relationship that you want. Because, so we talked about there's never been more access to single people. There is no problem in finding the partner. The problem is that somewhere in all of our neurology there's something that's stopping us. And so it starts with awareness of the clarity of it, and then it's about building the emotional capacity to do it. And once you have the emotional capacity, then you have the foundation to build the skills. And once you have the skills, then you have the confidence. So we also talked about many people want to jump from confusion or frustration or even despair to being confident, but you have to go through that process.
Rob, excuse me, though. You mentioned sharing within a relationship, but that is only successful if the sharing is equal and on the same plane. So there has to be clarity between both parties, or clarity of understanding, rather.
Yeah, we talked about there being the spectrum, and it needs, so if you're vulnerable and someone goes, oh yeah, that's interesting, okay, then that's not part of that you can create that atmosphere. So if you're vulnerable, in a good partner, that will create empathy. In a bad partner, there are people, for example, there are people that learn that not to be honest in a relationship, because when you're honest, someone can take advantage of it. But if someone takes advantage of it, and then it's a signal that there's someone that you can't have this kind of relationship with, because if they don't respond with empathy, then you don't have the ability. So there are limits with people, but it's about how you navigate that. And so equally, there are other people that may not really have thought about that, but in the right environment will relate with empathy. If you think about, I don't know, if I say like, if you think about what's driven your life theme, can you think of an incident? So if I give you mine, if I give you one from my life. So when I had a very dramatic big sister. And so when I was about 3 or 4, I remember us standing by the door, and mum and dad were somewhere else and arguing. And we kind of heard them. And I remember her saying, they're not our real parents. She go, they stole us from our parents and they're murderers and they're going to kill us in the middle of the night. And so then they came in, and like, you're not going to ask them. And you're like 3 or 4 and you're like, is it true? Isn't it true? And so what that meant was that I was never completely sure. And I knew most of the time, but like, you'd lie in bed at night and not be sure. So what it meant was that I disconnected and detached. And so I never fully trusted anyone. And so when you look at like what I talked about yesterday, comes really from someone who's quite detached and who looks objectively rather than being in the system. And so it meant that like I hid who I was. So I don't even now it's more difficult to connect to people because that's deep in your neurology. So it meant that if I had a problem, I had to go and resolve it on my own. So I'm thought more independently, and I learned very young to resolve my own problems. It also meant like there were certain things that I felt I couldn't show because that would show weakness, and I felt like being fully vulnerable would be weakness and would put me in danger. So so that has driven a lot of things in my life, like which I didn't even think about until later, when you look at why does this happen, what happened there, and you understand that the impact that has on your life. Can you think of an incident that maybe has you, for some people it's that, some people have had a traumatic childhood. So I didn't have a traumatic childhood, but I had a dramatic sister. And so then there's other things that, and so if you look, I give a lot of detail And I think of every problem when I'm doing this, and I probably over-explain, like my daughters say, mansplain. And what it is because if you did, like with my mum, if you would disagree, she would try and like shame you. It was like, oh, everyone knows this is true. And I'm like, I know, no, it's not true. But there was that pressure. And so people who over-explain, it's often because they were told, like, you're wrong, or something like that. So, so I'm trying to think what else. But equally, I remember when I being young, and my mum was saying, like, really young, and she would say, well, if they can do it, you can do it. And so I always had this belief, which caused me to like have a confidence in myself or in my ideas. So does that make sense? So I think what we're really looking at here is awareness of yourself, and the ability to be vulnerable, and the ability to express what's going on for you beneath the surface, and be able to share that with someone in a way that connects. So if we go to a breakout rooms, and the breakout room, if you notice, we're not really doing groups for this week. And the reason is because you can have a deeper conversation one-to-one. And it's a little bit more intense. The question, like to have a conversation around, is what would you think without the defining incidents in your life? And just to set up the conversation, the level at which we connect is the level at which we're capable of being vulnerable. But that's individual. That's down to everyone's choice, and we can't force someone to be vulnerable, and we shouldn't need to feel under pressure to be more vulnerable than we want to be. So if we're just respectful of each other and not to probe any more than anyone wants to be probed. Okay, so what would you think without the defining incidents in your life, and what is driving your relationship neurology, like in the operating system? Julie?
I don't understand. I'm really sorry. I don't understand what the question is.
Okay. Okay. So how do you get like the idea of what we're talking about? There's something's happened somewhere in your life which has
Yeah.
led to like the whole operating system. Okay. So if you'd had different experiences, how would that change how you live your life, how your relationships, like the patterns of things that happen in your relationships?
Yeah.
So another way of looking at it is, if you think of conflicts that you have in your relationship, conflicts that really matter, really affect you emotionally, what's triggering you is probably something that means something to you. And so why does that matter so much? And it's probably because someone you looked up to said it was really important. It was something that some situation made you feel like people who've been in bad situations can feel be scared to trust. So someone who's been in a bad relationship is going to be afraid to trust in another relationship. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So it's thinking about, so it could be a conversation could be as simple, if you didn't want to go deep, is money, sex, children, careers, dividing up chores. These kind of things are things that that are the most common fights in relationships. So what does money mean to you? What does a parenting style mean? What does it mean about equality of sharing domestic chores, or being left to do all the chores, or having to do chores? Does that make sense? But really, it's about conversation, and wherever you want that conversation to go. So we'll go for about 15 minutes. These are the kinds of things that are really deep and really underpin relationships. And if you looked at what caused the relationship to go as it does, this is really where it's like these are like the tectonic plates that are underneath all of the dynamics and all of the situations that we encounter. You can understand it from like even just examining yourself, like why, what makes that happen, why, and also from conversation. It's like we can find ourselves in conversation with others. So, did anyone get any insights or have anything that they want to share from the conversation?
We didn't get to that point. We were just getting to know each other.
It was really interesting chatting with Julie because we realized that despite growing up in different continents, we had very, very sheltering parents. And because they sheltered us even into our adulthood, we tend to look for partners who will provide us the same shelter and freedom and not question about it. So the problem is that what the characteristic that I grew up with might not be what is termed as normal in most of the relationship. For example, I can just go right now and ask my dad for money without necessarily having to explain to him why I need the money. I'll just say, this is how much I want, and he will just give it to me, no question asked. But can I do the same thing with a man I'm in a relationship with because we know finance is one of the things and I need to be accountable with? No. And it has taken at least some time for me to be able to realize that, yes, your parents do spoil you, but you cannot come with that to a relationship. You need to be able to lower your expectation about what you can expect from this individual because we were all raised differently.
It's very because we're used to a family relationship and particularly parents, and for some people have really loving parents and parents that really want to give to them, and parent child is probably the most uneven relationship because like we love our parents because they loved us so much before we loved them, if that makes sense. Like we talked about the baby, like you love the baby and the baby loves you because you give it so much love. And then what we're looking for in a relationship is someone to do that, and it's a completely different dynamic because we're all looking for that, and we don't necessarily. So sometimes we don't love until we're shown that we're loved. Thank you for that. Anyone else have any different thoughts?
I was with Betty, and we both seemed to have grown up in a household where our mothers particularly weren't very sort of loving towards us, and we've both sort of grown up now almost feeling like we're not good enough. And the other thing that just came to my mind was I grew up in a very violent household. My dad was very violent towards my mom, and finally went off when I was about 11 with another woman. But I never felt like, when I see other girls that adore their dads, and they've got a great father-daughter relationship, I never had that with my dad. And I think it's made me grow up longing for a man to love me like I want to be loved. And I think it's because I didn't have that from a father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's interesting, this session really, the impact, because I know that, childhood and things that happen to you when you're younger do impact on how you are as an adult. But I hadn't really kind of thought about that much before.
Yeah. we talked a little bit yesterday about attachment style, and so attachment style is one of it. But yeah, if you've grown up and you felt unsafe in your home, if you felt not good enough, that's probably the hardest thing to overcome. Because if you have that start, because on the one hand, you have, like, if you have these loving parents that, you know, like something, there's a spectrum in parenting, isn't there? There's some parents that want to give everything, and they think if they give everything, that will help the child. And then there's other parents that maybe don't, and some parents that are struggling themselves. So, I mean, I was lucky with my parents, but my mum came from a home where there was, like, my granddad was drunk and abusive, would come home drunk and violent, and so there was all that, and so I can see how that impacted my mum, which impacted me in our bringing up. So yeah, there's so much,
I think
and
sorry, Rob. I think as well, we use the word needy, both Betty and I, and I've been called needy before, but I had some therapy and was told there's no such thing as needy. We all have needs, and those needs need to be met in order for you to feel secure, etc. And I think that was another thing, and I think that my neediness comes again from what I was just talking about. Sorry to have interrupted you there.
No, it's a great point. Is we talked a little bit about that yesterday, about Dr. Mario Martinez, who says that the wounds that you get from relationship need to be healed in a relationship. And he talked about, like, shame. So what was it? Shame, betrayal, and abandonment. And shame is healed by being honored. Abandonment is by loyalty, and shame, abandonment. I've got a terrible memory, but Dr. Mario Martinez has that, those things. He's got some really interesting stuff on YouTube. When people say needy, what they're really talking about is, we're talking big picture. So, like, people talk in these broad strokes, and people think, oh, that's too much trouble, what's too needy. But it's understanding the details, and what can help is when you understand that, and if you really go into it and go, okay, well, what do I need? What do I need to feel? And so if you say to someone, okay, this happened, it makes me feel like this, so what I really need is to feel like this. And if you can express that, it makes it easier. Because what a lot of people are saying, oh, it's too needy, is that someone presents with this, like, okay, so what it can be is that if you are, to use those words, needy, then what's going to happen in that interaction is your anxiety is going to want reassurance. Now, if you're not clear about it and say, look, I'm feeling anxious and what I want is reassurance because of this. If you're not upfront and honest about it, what you're doing is you've got a surface level interaction, but you're trying to get this currency from them. And that's not clean. And people feel that as manipulative, and people feel it as, like, people can sometimes feel that kind of energy, and that you're trying to get something from them, and it can feel like manipulative or overwhelming. And so when you have that understanding of it, and you say, this is what I need and why I need it, then that lets someone be able to help you. So the basis of nonviolent communication is the assumption that people want to help you. So, I mean, what's the formula for nonviolent communication? It's something like, when you do this, I feel like this. Could you, and so what you're doing is you're saying, I feel like this because of this. And it's not, you do that, I feel this. It's because that's not automatic. There's something between what someone does and how you feel. And that is like that whole neurology in your operating system. Now, when you say you do this, you know, like people would normally say, when you do this, I feel that it comes across as blame. But when you give someone the explanation, it's not your fault, but it's because of this. What I need is this, and someone can do it or not. And most people, particularly if you're in a relationship, they generally want to help you. So, like for example, men, one of the big drive, like, okay, so if you're looking at why men leave a relationship, it's because what most men will say, I couldn't make her happy a lot of the time. I couldn't make her happy. Because implicit in that whole fairy tale thing is that men have to play the role of being the prince. And so a man feels if a woman's unhappy, it's because he's not good enough. So when men leave a relationship or even just check out of the relationship, it's often because they feel they're lacking because as a reflection of the woman not being happy. So the more that you can communicate and explain, and the more, so when I say broad strokes, what I mean is like, you know, you get modern art and there's just big lines. Well, like fine art is the fine like little details, and the more details you can get, the more connection you have, the more awareness you have, and the more the richer the relationship will be.
But if men are conditioned to give, to think of themselves as providers, and that's their forte, that's their strength, that's what they are expert in, you know, that's their expertise, that's what they can do. And the woman does not need those things in terms of it being the most important things in their lives. You know, it's important, but that's not it. She's not dependent on him for those things. The things that she needs, the men, if they have not been exposed to, practiced in, how can they then deliver those things that they are in kindergarten, at the kindergarten stage in? So to my mind, that is part of what needs to be corrected. And it then, if the lady has to now become the coach, the teacher, then that sets up a very difficult situation, because after a while, it's almost like, you know, if you have a sick partner and you become a carer, then the romance kind of goes, you become like a mother. So how do you get that person to make that shift? It's one thing to say it, but how do they then equip themselves with those tools to be more caring, if that's what you want, more, you know, etc., etc., etc. The soft skills then.
Okay, yeah. So that's really a big dynamic today, isn't it? So the broad strokes is that men are set up to be the provider, and typically men know how to do that quite well. Yet now we have a lot of successful women, and successful women are finding it difficult to find a partner because, number one, that broad strokes thing of being a successful woman who maybe earns more than the man is threatening. So it's threatening at the big strokes. But if you go in to use the analogy that we used before, like if you're here and you're saying I'm going to New York, and I said like a couple can say, okay, we're going to New York, but when you get closer, they've got different ideas of where they're going in New York. So zooming in and like broad strokes is like going to New York, and the fine details is exactly where are we going in New York. So your question is, how does a woman deal with that? Okay, so it's not really about coaching. It's not really about you're going to help them. It's about the willingness to do it. Emotional growth, and really like what we're talking about is overcoming neurology, is the willingness. So it's the willingness to look at it, and most people who won't, it's because of fear. So it's not the woman's job to look at it, but it's the woman's job to not be judgmental, to make it safe, to look to, because when people judge, that's when people close down. When people seek to understand, that's when people feel seen. So it's really about the being seen. And in all areas of relationships, there's going to be a time, someone who's better at, there's going to be someone who's better at seeing someone. There's going to be someone who's better at supporting someone. There's going to be someone who's better at making someone feel safe, and someone who's better at making someone feel satisfied. So it's not necessarily that you have to coach someone, but you have to, first of all, make it safe for someone. You have to navigate, as in who will dance with you on that. So some people will dance, some people will take that safety and that encouragement and that prompting and respond, and some people won't. And so where you set up as a coach is really where you've set up with a goal and you have the agenda. And when you have the agenda, people can feel that and there's control. So it's more about offering people. So, and that's really where vulnerability and being present and respect and all of that comes in. And it's also the kindness of allowing someone to stumble.
Well, to my mind, I'm thinking that a partner who shows or demonstrates willingness to explore other areas of their being, so to speak, that is an encouragement for the partner who is feeling shortchanged to, become part and parcel of that growth. To respond, to be, as you say, to be kind, to, be willing to allow for growth, etc., and support. But if somebody doesn't see that is a missing part of the relationship, then how does one even begin that discussion in a safe way without getting angry, without shutting down, those kinds of things?
Okay, so why would they get angry and why would they shut down?
Well, they're defensive. There's fear. Maybe they think if they do this, they may fail, and it may still not be good enough for you. And why bother? I mean, that's one thing.
Yeah. So, so it may be that they don't want to. In which case, you have to navigate around that. As in, you can't probably have that relationship because some people just won't. Some people just won't want to. Some people will talk about wanting to, but they're talking the game rather than doing it. So I think all you can do, offer someone the invitation to, and then it's about, so there's like thresholds of you can make it easier, but you can't take a horse to water. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, and that's individual choice. And so it's really about, because that's about how vulnerable they are willing to be. And if they're not willing to be vulnerable, because really the emotional stuff is not hard to get intellectually. It's just, are you willing to be the vulnerable? Are you willing to do that? So it's fear that stops people. And sometimes it's just timing as well. Like the time of day. So, like you have a line of, if you feel enriched, and like there's the personal line of how happy you feel. The happier you feel, the more willing you're going to be. Whereas if you're down in fear and anger and those kind of things, you're not going to want to look. So that's why it's about capacity, because it's not just your capacity, but it's their capacity. Because capacity is really what's going to drive the relationship. That's the point where people will disconnect. That's the point where relationships will break.
What did you mean when you said emotional capacity earlier, Rob? You said you need awareness, emotional capacity, and then the skills which lead to confidence. But what does emotional capacity mean?
Basically, the willingness to be open, the willingness to be vulnerable. So if you really want to connect, it's about really connecting person to person. It's dropping the facades. It's really being honest about what you want. And that's really what's going to drive the relationship. Does that make sense? Or is it too vague?
Yeah, okay, thanks.
But it comes back down to trust. To be that vulnerable, you have to have the trust.
Yeah, and so people have different levels of trust, and some people will 20 years they still won't open up. So it's on one level it's trust of you, but the real defining thing is trust of themselves.
What do you mean when you say trust of yourself?
Okay, so to be vulnerable is to share who you are, regardless of what other people think. People sometimes think vulnerability is weakness because they think I say this and then, oh, it's embarrassing, I'm going to look stupid. And so they don't. Whereas what's really strength is the ability to say, this is who I am, whether you like me or not. Because weakness is really needing people to like you. Well, sorry, what was the question? Did I answer the question, or is there a bit more to it?
Yeah, I think that answers it.
This is quite difficult because it's really what we're looking at is what are the tectonic plates that are going to move the relationship? Because how all this neurology stuff is what, as it moves, is what's going to create the crack in the relationship that creates the relationship to break. And that sounds quite abstract and vague, but does it make sense of how that would impact a relationship?
Can you say that again, please, Rob?
Okay, so the neurology that you have, like what's in your operating system, your beliefs, your assumptions, your expectations, as they're there when you meet someone. So like the two of you have this, and these are like the tectonic plates underneath your world. And as you go through life, and there's like you have babies, and there's more challenges as you have financial problems, as you have health problems, as your parents get older, and you then have to deal with them. All of these are extra stresses, and what they do is they change the landscape of the relationship. And so then the tectonic plates change of how you relate to each other, like underneath the surface. And it's these moving that is what creates the cracks that breaks relationships.
I can explain to Betty in another way. Basically, it's trusting that you are lovable the way you are. You don't need to hide about yourself. You don't need to fear being judged by others of who you are. We have all made mistakes, and but we were all products of both nature and nurture, which neither of which we had control over. So it wasn't our fault. It was our nurture that mostly prompted us to make those mistakes. So we should forgive ourselves, and after we forgive ourselves, we love ourselves, so we don't fear being judged, nor fear sharing ourselves with other people.
Thanks, Haywood.
Okay. So there's another part to the Think Free. And I just want to share this. This is really about, we have a blueprint of kind of who we are, which is like genetics, is like Faye said, it's our cultural experience, it's our parental experience, all the things that we've seen and experienced in life. And then there's the wider cultural understanding of what we are. Like the blueprint is what would make us happy. is like the bounds of what we would become is what's true to who we are. But we learn, so most of us have learned from school, from parents, from experience, like, don't do this, don't do that, that's wrong. And so what this does is it takes us off the course of where we would be originally, and we become distorted by, so for example, if you look at the biggest fear that we have, it's public speaking. And it's because public speaking is exposing who you are. Because most of us have this social mask. If you look at Facebook and Instagram, they've accentuated this social mask, that we even have filters so that we look our best. And people put their best, like the perfect family, perfect couple, on Facebook and Instagram, which is different from the reality. And so what they're doing is they're trying to portray an image that's different than reality, so that people think that they're better than they are. And the fear driving public speaking is that once you get up and you start talking, people are going to realize you're not as good as the mask of what you say, like of what you, or how you want to be in your head. Like, I would love to be really smooth and slick in my delivery, but I'm not. And so there's a fear of public speaking because it exposes who you are. So there's that. So one level is dogma. So this is like all the stuff that we get, the religious ideas, or the ideas from our culture, from our school, from everything we've taught. So even if you look at, we all go to school and we all learn a curriculum, but the curriculum is different from every country to every country. And if you look at our curriculum here in England, our curriculum has like Vikings as thugs, the Romans as the invading things, and there's always a rivalry between countries that are next to each other. So like there's a rivalry, England and Scotland, England and Ireland, England and Wales. And it's because there's so much tension between invasion and things like that. And so the story that we have, so like Christopher Columbus is this hero who discovered America. But Christopher Columbus was the man that was directly or indirectly responsible for like 35 million deaths. Russia in a time of Stalin thought that Stalin was this huge, great hero. Nazi Germany thought that Hitler was, I mean, they were even taught that he was the god. So everything we learn is shaped by the person who wrote the narrative. And when you come from a patriarchy, it's men that have written a narrative. When you come from religion, it's whoever's been, like, it's the type of religion has set the narrative. And when you come from like cultural, like social, it's going to be the government and the political parties. So all of that taints. So we become filtered through that, and sometimes we become distorted. So where we become unhappy is where that doesn't fit with what's natural and like our natural blueprint. So then the other thing is, sometimes it's what we don't know. And the biggest problem of our problems is usually not what we don't know, but what we know that isn't true. So it's the assumptions we're working on that we think are certainty, which are actually not true. Okay, so there's ignorance and there's dogma, but there's also emotion. So if you're blinded by lust and you see this person who is just amazing, there's like the halo effect where you assume they're more intelligent, they're more confident, they're more, all of these things are better because of one thing. And so there's a lot of people who are dating, they have idealization, and they put someone on a pedestal that they're wonderful. 3-5 years later, they're like, who's this person? You know, like, oh, they can't do this, they can't do that. But they were so blinded that that's what drove them into the relationship. So there's all kinds of things like what we're afraid of. We look for excuses. We talked about the lottery myth and the myth of the one. And that is driven by a wish that it would be easy. So like, if you look at the pharmaceutical industry is driven by like the hope of medicine, by the hope that one pill. So like everyone hopes that there's going to be one pill that will cure cancer and heart disease and all of these things, when really they're lifestyle diseases and they're caused by an accumulation of factors. But we don't want to make those changes. So like the easy example is we want to lose weight, but we don't want to not eat what we like. And that's why there's 1,000 different diets, because some of them allow us different things to eat. So we get swayed off course by dogma, by what we know not to be true, or not knowing what's true, by our emotions. So what happens for most people typically who go through the whole cultural schooling and whatever, is this ongoing running program of not being enough. And so most people feel like, who am I to know this? Who am I to say that? Who am I to stand out? So there's this ongoing sense of inadequacy. I forgot where I was going, but there's so it's basically like, because of dogma, because of emotion and whatever, we don't live to our blueprint. So yeah, so Think Free is about like everything that you've been told in dogma is because that serves someone else. So for example, school, the idea of school is about creating productive citizens. And it comes from, like, allegedly it comes from the idea that if you sit in rows, it was really to train feral kids who were used to working on the farm to be good factory workers, and who could sit and produce widgets. So school generally doesn't teach creativity and independent thinking. It teaches follow the herd, be a good worker. So thinking free is examining, is it really true, or is it fitting someone else's story? So think free. So that's the think free bit. But the second part is be strong. And most people, if you look at most people's, like the most common emotional problems, stress and things like that, is because they're telling a story that doesn't make them strong. If you tell a story like, oh, this happens to me because I'm not good enough at this, I'm lacking this, I'm low in self-esteem, all of these things, is because you're telling a story that doesn't make you strong. And when we blame and complain, first of all, we don't make ourselves strong, but we also villainize other people. And so if a relationship doesn't work out, it doesn't mean you, like, typically it's demonize the ex. Oh, it's because he was shit and because she wanted this and whatever. But people are people. They're all running on the programs. None of us are perfect. All of us are flawed. And it's understanding what the flaws are and what the flaws you can cope with. But blaming and complaining never works, because it doesn't make us stronger and it doesn't make them stronger. So it's more important, like, if we can think free and really go to the fine strokes rather than the broad strokes, if we can understand someone else, we can make them strong too. Because a lot of the reason why people don't want to be vulnerable, why people don't want to go into the emotional stuff, is because it feels bad. Because most relationships, when we look at most relationships, don't work. They don't work because they come from control and manipulation. When people feel controlled or manipulated, they're not going to open up. And so if we create a relationship that's based on freedom, if we create a relationship that's based on an invitation to grow, then more people will take that invitation and be ready to grow. So people who say that men don't open up, well, men don't open up because there's already this program that they're running that I should be better, and if my partner's not happy, then it's because I'm not doing enough. Then they're already starting from a place of judgment and blame, and the complaints from someone else just make them feel worse, and so they're not going to open up. So we need to think free, be strong, and make others strong.
Is
And
that
then
where
the-
the awareness comes in then, Rob? You know that list you said, awareness, emotional capacity and skills. Does the awareness mean being aware of the story you're telling?
Yes. Yeah. So clarity comes with clarity is the awareness. And so most people look from, if you're looking on the surface, they did this, they were shit. So it's like there's a difference between who someone is and the behavior that they do. And we have to understand so this is where having an awareness of what drives the behavior. And if we understand what drives the behavior, then we have a choice to change it. If we judge the behavior, then we shut down the awareness and we shut down the ability to grow from it.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
So yes, so it's really about start with clarity, build capacity, and then so that like the competence. So the emotional capacity is once someone feels safe, once someone feels confident, once someone feels strong, it's much easier. And it's not like doing a PhD. It's just doing it and feeling awkward. It's a bit like learning to drive a car. It's going to be difficult and awkward and clunky to start with, but eventually it becomes easier. And so it's really anxiety is the fear of what might happen. But once we actually do something, we overcome anxiety. So we stay stuck in anxiety if we don't do the thing, because it's like anxiety is like this thing is like this burning flame, and you get near and it feels hot, and so you keep shying back, and then the fire grows, and so there's more and more things that you're going to be anxious about. Whereas actually, if you go to the anxiety and you realize that nothing really bad happens, because anxiety has to go once you've moved into it, because anxiety is the future fear of what might happen. And once it's happened, it can't have that impact on you anymore.
The best way to conquer our fears by confronting it.
Yeah, and all fear starts with us. All fights start with us. So it's our inner conflict. So when there's emotional, like when there's a row, often it's because this thing has been bugging you. And as it's bugging you, it stirs up more and more resentment, and it has more emotional charge. If you're just really honest all the time, okay, that this is bothering me because of this, there's less emotional charge to it. And so what usually happens is things build up. And then when we have that, like our emotional tolerance levels reached, we say it, but we say it with a spew of venom because of that charge. And so then like no one reacts to being accused and attacked. Well, okay. So that is think free, be strong. And then the last part is really about share joy, which means lots of people get into relationships to be fixed or to fix. And the only place a relationship has strength and strong foundations is from joy. And we want others to make us, often people want to be in a relationship for someone else to make them happy, but it's down to us. we have to heal our hurts. And like we've talked, there are relational wounds which need someone else there. But in terms of, so one of the things men will often say about vulnerability is they'll say, oh, I tried that, and people just don't have any respect. But there's a difference between processing something and sharing it where it makes sense to someone, and the other thing, what a lot of men will typically do, they won't understand, is they'll just go, oh, this is like just spit out a stream of consciousness, because they haven't processed it. And because they haven't processed it, someone just gets all these emotions and go, and this where, like, you know, like women can say, like, oh, you're like, man up, and all these kind of things. And it's because, like, first of all, we are the only one responsible for ourselves. No, our partner's not responsible for us. So we have to heal. And this is the think free, be strong, that you start from a place of strength. And then when you're from that place of strength, you share your joy. So we have to be happy individually. If we're not happy in ourselves, if we can't heal our own, and I'm not talking about relational wounds, but our own, like if you're in a row and someone hurts you, and you know, normally that's just retaliate at the same level. And so you just hurt each other. So it's sometimes about, you have to have a responsibility to go away and fix how you feel and come back when you're stronger. So the ability to self-soothe, the ability to regulate your own emotions is important, so that you share from a strength of, like, no one wants to be in a relationship with someone that they have to pull up. You want to be in a relationship with someone who's equally strong, so that you share the good times. Okay, so that was day 4. As we have, we'll just go round. Anyone who's got any insights, perspectives, or thoughts they'd like to share.
Well, when you say self-soothe, Rob, how do we learn to do that? Is it just practicing?
So something happens and it bothers me. So it's understanding. It's practicing. It's finding what works for you. So if something bothers you, it might be that a run works for you. It might be that understanding it works for you. It might be, this is where capacity is. It's finding the ability to resolve the pain. So a lot of capacity is proactive, as in, like, I think about the big 6. The big 6 as in sleep. If you don't get enough sleep, you're operating on less capacity, and therefore you're going to react more negatively. If you're under a lot of stress, if you have a poor diet, you'll have a lot of like if you have a lot of sugar, it creates the chemistry for a lot of anxiety. If you're not in good shape, and then in fitness is like stamina, strength and suppleness. So if you sit a lot and you've never done any kind of stretching or yoga or anything like that, you're going to get aches and pains and bad backs and things like that, which impacts your mood. So there's all of these things of being strong physically and emotionally that make you, and just generally feeling good about yourself, which make you better able to handle emotions. And then it's also things like whether it's mindfulness or meditation, and a big one is having some sense of meaning. So whether you're religious, whether you have some kind of spiritual view, or you just have some view of what your life's about, and what purpose that has, that gives you some sense of why things are important, puts things in context. So it's just being able to look after yourself emotionally, keep yourself above the line.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. So tomorrow we have the last one, which is basically, so just to summarize, we had day one, which was the game of relationships, which means connection is greater than a relation, is more important than a relationship. Nurture the relationship. Pilot the plane, don't drive the car. Day two was deliciously nutritious relationships, which means relationships that are about, which means relationships are where you feel seen, safe, satisfied and supported, with by you showing up with vulnerability, integrity, presence and kindness, and your partner doing the same, and also responding to each other, responding to vulnerability, to presence, to kindness and integrity, in a way that creates a positive atmosphere, so that the relationship becomes one of freedom rather than control. Yesterday we talked about the fairy tale framework, where the fairy tale framework is written into our neurology, which creates expectations and assumptions that mean that we have no way of dealing with problems in a relationship, which mean that most people don't know how to fix a relationship, and so generally they'll think that the relationship's over when it really could have had more legs. We talked about the 4 relationship truths of relationships are a struggle, and it's about our narratives that determine that create our relationship problems, and over changing the narrative means that we can change the nature of the relationship. And tonight we talked about thinking free of dogma, free of emotions, and free of things that we've mislearned or ignorance. And we talked about being strong, telling the story that makes us strong, and also making others strong, and sharing from a place of joy. So tomorrow we're going to talk about there's 7 basic problems in the relationship journey and 7 basic skills. And so we're going to talk about what those 7 are tomorrow. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a good evening. And
before you go, Rob, I just wanted to share something. I'm working on your chart. I don't know if you can see it. No, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. But your chart, the satisfied, supported, seen, safe one. I wanted to check with you if you're changing anything in it. I'm trying to create a poster of it. So if you wanted to change anything on it before I do it, and then I would share it with everybody.
Which one did I show? How detailed is it?
I feel loved, I'm stronger, I matter, I belong. The one with the circles.
Yeah, okay. I can share that here. I think.
Are you changing anything on it?
But, there is a more detailed one.
Oh, okay.
I think that's too detailed. So this one.
Yeah, that's the one. I've made it into a chart. I've done a diagram of it, and I just wanted to know if you're changing anything or adding anything to it.
Not at the moment. Yeah, but I mean things always change. But yeah, that's yeah. I think for that level of one, there is like another one that's like super detailed, but it's.
Well, this
it's got a lot more.
I kind of like this one because it's not too complicated, and it's just a nice reminder, I find, which is why I'm doing this.
Yeah, the more detailed one is for a diagnostic, so that people can like assess their relationship, and also like how do you build it. So I mean, really, you build it by the individuals, which is like the other diagram, but. Yeah, like a step-by-step version.
Okay. When I'm finished, I'll share it with you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Rob, are we going to talk more about attachment style?
What we're doing here is really a whip through of the clarity. So we talked a little bit about how attachment style is huge. So not specifically, there are going to be, like I want to talk about tomorrow, there's 7 problems. And so with every problem, there's a process. And so there will be groups and like pathways. But that's really, so we could get to clarity, like a big overview of clarity in a week. But really getting capacity, which is the big one, it takes more longer. And it's more training and practice and developing skills. So not this week.
Okay.
Okay. But the 3 big books really on attachment are Sue Johnson's I Like Best. Stan Tatkin's stuff is all attachment. And then there's another one, I didn't really like it, but it's Attached. It has good reviews. Attached, I think it's Amelie Levine and someone else.
Oh yeah, I did it in the book club.
Okay, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And hopefully see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everyone.
Will we get a certificate of participation for the 5 days of this course?
Hold on there, 1 minute. 1 minute.
Bye. You will tell me the answer tomorrow.
Hold on, stay there,
We
Sandra.
have to graduate. So we've all passed.
Right, Sandra, here you go.
Okay, thank you very much.
Show that to your husband and ask him to get one as well.
Yeah, level 2.
Okay, then. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Night.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone,
Bye.
see you tomorrow.